Karen stepped into her backyard and stopped cold. A brand new wall of white vinyl stood where open lawn had been days earlier. Her stone patio was on the wrong side of it. Her outdoor kitchen was on the wrong side of it. Her rose beds and the Japanese maples she treated like a trophy were now cut off behind a fence she could not explain away. Her suitcase dropped into the grass as she rushed the line, gripping the rails and staring through them in disbelief. By the time sheriff's deputies pulled up, half the street had gathered to watch. The HOA president kept pointing at the fence like it was a crime scene. The homeowner next door looked almost relaxed. That was the morning her little empire cracked in front of everyone. Before the fence war, Mark Riley had built his life around patience, structure, and controlled responses. After 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, he and his wife Sarah wanted quiet more than anything. They bought a corner lot house in a tidy subdivision with trimmed hedges, peaceful evenings, and enough yard for their rescue German Shepherd, General, to run safely. Sarah worked long shifts as a nurse. Mark handled the house projects with the kind of care that comes from years of working where mistakes carry real consequences. That was why he handled the cedar fence by the book. He read the HOA rules from beginning to end, checked every setback, submitted the architectural forms, attached diagrams, and waited for written approval before spending $1. The approval came back clean. Then, Karen became HOA president. She had lived in the neighborhood for decades and carried herself like longevity was ownership. She loved clipboards, committees, and the intoxicating weight of small authority. Within weeks, people stopped lingering in their driveways when her SUV rolled by. Basketball hoops vanished, garden ornaments disappeared, flags came down. Harmless details started getting scrubbed out of the neighborhood, one complaint at a time. From a distance, it looked petty. Up close, it was control. The line was crossed on a humid afternoon when Mark came home and found a demolition crew ripping his new fence out of the ground. Karen stood in the driveway, directing the operation with smug certainty, while cedar panels disappeared into a truck beside a roaring wood chipper at the curb. 6 weeks of labor and $7,000 of materials were being destroyed as if his property existed only by her permission. She claimed an emergency HOA rule change had suddenly made his approved fence unacceptable on a corner lot. There had been no notice, no vote, no hearing, and no court order. Just hired workers, rented equipment, and one woman acting like process no longer mattered because she held the title. Mark did not shout. He documented everything. He filmed the crew, the missing fence line, the contractor truck, and Karen overseeing the whole thing while threats of fines, liens, and removal charges piled up behind her manufactured certainty. When Sarah came home from the hospital and saw the open yard, the damage felt bigger than lumber. General had lost his secure space. Their home felt exposed. That night, Mark checked the HOA portal, searched the bylaws, and found nothing. No amendment, no emergency authority, no legal basis at all. The next piece dropped into place when Arthur Mallister, a retired civil engineer on the architectural committee, quietly confirmed what Mark already suspected. There had been no valid rule change. Karen had staged a sham action without proper notice, without a quorum, and without authority to undo an approved project. She had also pressured other committee members into silence. That turned one ugly afternoon into a campaign. Mark called Ben Carter, an old friend now practicing property law. Ben sent a demand letter that laid out the approvals, the illegal demolition, and the liability in cold, surgical detail. Karen answered with more arrogance instead of caution. She mailed back fresh fines, added an inflated demolition bill, and personally signed the paperwork linking herself directly to the abuse. Then Mark started walking the neighborhood with General. The stories came slowly, then all at once. A young couple had been fined because their son's basketball hoop offended neighborhood aesthetics.
A widow was forced to pack up garden gnomes that reminded her of her late husband. A retired Marine had been pushed to take down his flags over technicalities nobody had enforced before. Fear had become routine, so had selective punishment. The homeowners built a shared record, a timeline, and a legal paper trail. Then Karen made her biggest mistake yet. She announced a beautification project requiring uniform white vinyl fencing along the main road-facing lots, including hers and Mark's, with placement tied to the official property line. To everyone else, it looked like another power play. To Mark, it looked like an opening. Months earlier, while studying plats for his first fence, he had noticed something odd about the boundary between their lots. He ordered a certified survey.
The survey was devastating. The original iron pens showed that Karen had been using a 10-foot strip of Mark's property for years, not a few inches, a full slice of land that included the edge of her stone patio, part of her outdoor kitchen, her prized rose beds, and the Japanese maple she treated like family. The shrubs everyone assumed marked the boundary were wrong. Legally, the land was his. Mark did not celebrate. He prepared. He hired one of Karen's own approved contractors. He handed over the official survey map. He gave written instructions to install the new white vinyl fence exactly on the flagged legal boundary, without deviation, then got the project manager's signature acknowledging the line. After that, he checked the community calendar and found the final gift. Karen would be out of town at an HOA leadership conference while the installation happened. By Friday morning, augers were chewing into the ground. Posts went up in a clean line. Panels snapped into place. The fence rose bright, straight, and mercilessly compliant. From Mark's kitchen window, the geometry looked almost elegant. It did not scream revenge. It whispered precision. By the time the final panel locked in, her patio and garden had been transferred from habit to law. All that remained was for Karen to come home and see it.
She did, and the reaction was volcanic. Karen stepped into our backyard and found her world cut in half. Neighbors drifted outside almost instantly, drawn by the sound of a public collapse years in the making. She called the sheriff, certain a badge would restore the authority that the survey had erased. Instead, the deputies studied the documents Mark handed them, the HOA fence directive, the certified boundary survey, and the contractor's signed work order. Their conclusion was brief, devastating, and public. The fence stood on Mark's land. It was a civil matter. Her title meant nothing. But the real collapse came days later at the annual HOA meeting. Mark's coalition had spent weeks gathering proxies and evidence. The clubhouse overflowed. When the motion came to remove the board, the room was already charged. Mark walked the homeowners through everything with cold clarity. The approved cedar fence, the illegal demolition, the fake enforcement, the harassment letters, the selective fines, the ignored records request, and finally the contractor invoice for his fence removal. He projected Karen's bill beside a legitimate quote for the same work. The gap was so outrageous the room audibly turned. What had looked like bullying now looked like something worse. Hands went up almost everywhere. In one vote, the board lost its power, Karen lost her shield, and the neighborhood finally saw her exactly as she was.
After that night, the cleanup moved fast. Arthur became interim president. The new board suspended Karen-era fines, opened the records, and hired Ben to protect the association instead of its abusers. The HOA's insurer settled Mark's claim for the destroyed cedar fence, the survey costs, legal fees, and punitive damages. But the deeper damage was still sitting in the books. A forensic review uncovered a pattern of wildly inflated contractor invoices tied to repeated cash movements that led back to Karen. The fence demolition had not been a one-time tantrum. It had been part of a sloppy kickback scheme funded by her own neighbors. The evidence went to investigators. Charges followed. Karen eventually lost the house under the weight of legal bills and public disgrace. Before the sale could close, her encroaching patio and outdoor kitchen had to be removed from Mark's property. The same kind of destruction she once ordered so casually came back to her in slow, expensive stages. A young family bought the house after she left. They introduced themselves on day one. No threats, no clipboards, just relief. The neighborhood changed too. The HOA rewrote its rules around open records, quorum requirements, homeowner appeals, and competitive vendor bidding. Mrs. Gable helped transplant Karen's abandoned roses into a shared garden near the clubhouse entrance where everyone could enjoy them. General finally had the secure yard he had always needed. Sarah got her peace back. Mark got something better than revenge. He got proof that order returns the moment people stop surrendering to bullies, one household at a time. So how many petty tyrants stay powerful only because everyone around them thinks they are fighting alone?